Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. A new word is emerging, like a butterfly emerging from lava, like a unicorn taking a new birth, rather a phoenix, I'll say, rising from its ashes. Every catalytic change brings forth something new, and that's what's happening. We had 2 years of most terrifying pandemic, and then comes Russian invasion of Ukraine with a sneaking fear of a possible nuclear holocaust, which is not likely to happen, but the danger is already there. And the new word emerging from the pandemic and this war has diverse challenges. And that's what I always say, that all the difficulties, all the problems are in fact opportunities. And this gives options to the countries like India. These options, well utilized, can be used to the benefit for the country, can be used to enhance its power, its glory. And just as I said, this event of Ukraine war has been in works for nearly a decade. It's not something new. And purposely, nobody in the media, nobody in the government was talking about it anywhere. For nearly 10 decades, since the Budapest Pact was signed, the germs of the this war were there. The way, the Treaty of Versailles was signed at the end of the First World War. But that was in fact the seed of the Second World War. The same was happening here. A matter involving Russia, European Union, and NATO combined on the European front was breeding. And that issue assumed this war shape. So it's now a global rule of international law, they call it. And India has done very well not to take sides, as I've been writing very often. This was the most sensible and pragmatic thing for India to do. They should not have. This was a fight between the European matter and the Europe NATO needled Russia. And the Ukraine was being used as a cat's paw. It was being used as an instrument. So we have to take care. The European fight must not become an Asian fight. The better outcome would be anything. Either it becomes a small captive state of Russia or becomes a part of Russia. That should be left to those two countries. And as a new world order emerges and economic, political and military alliances are shown up their ineptitude, the question that India must ask ourselves is, what is India's place in the new world order? One thing is clear, that there is every danger of USA in its fit of populism imposing sanctions on India for purchasing S-400 satellite defense system, which is a very essential, very imperative need for India. Then the breakdown of the global supply chain, the disturbance in the energy and the commodity market will definitely lead to a new situation, and this would need governments, policymakers, business people and the people to be ready for decades of uncertainty and volatility. But why should it be? As a matter of fact, as I said, use this and God sent, if not Russian sent opportunity to enhance your capabilities. If you can take preventive steps and steer the ship in the turbulent seas today, then India can not only retain its glory or regain its own glory, but can become a world leader. Now, we cannot deny that India has huge advantages. It has a large land base that's reasonably large, and the subcontinent in the real sense of the word. And then huge population with a large and increasing educated mass of people. And that educated mass of people, if it can rule in the global corporate world, can easily transform Indian corporate system. Their knowledge, their professionalism, their capabilities are second to none in the world. And then another thing, a high percentage of the Indians are multilingual and speak more than 2 or 3 languages, including English. As a matter of fact, if we look at the English-speaking countries, possibly India is the largest English-speaking country in the world. Though we say our national language is Hindi, but the real language that unites the country is English. So, huge coastline, variety of weathers, so that you can grow anything all the year round. So, all those advantages, political, geographical, natural, and professionalism of the people. What the government and the policymaker have to do is to convert these factors into beneficial use for enhancing the capability of the nation. There is no doubt in my mind that in case US and in the Biden era is quite possible, they will impose sanctions. They should not, but they would. There is a growing need. Your Ted Cruz said yesterday that this would be a folly, but people like Elizabeth Warren and that set of 3 Indian origin congressmen like Pranita and others, they want to earn the label of being progressive, leftist and honest. So you can be prepared for the sanctions. However, why should they worry you? You have a huge domestic market yourself. And you could seriously look at reducing your need of imports by achieving domestic production and import substitution. And that would be a greatest achievement. As a matter of fact, if the sanctions are levied, India would emerge stronger. But then it has to exercise its options sensibly, carefully, and logically. The first thing that has got to be done is make India one market for all goods and services. All inter-provincial restrictions have to be removed right away. These inter-provincial trade barriers are a curse. They are happening in Canada, and I have always been saying they are something which is quite an impediment to the growth of the country. So make India one market. If the whole of Europe can be one market, why not the whole of India be one market? And as a matter of fact, the government has taken the initiative. The GST law imposition is a great step forward towards making India one market. GST Council attempting to standardize procedures and interpretation of laws related to good movement and consumption would go a long way in achieving this objective. Then the Indian business have global business supply chain in order. So what we need to do is to get our domestic movement supply chain better organized. Our supply chains, the logistics, are the biggest problem in India. And India, unfortunately, despite all advice, has not done that. I remember 93, it was 5, yes. Atal Bihari Ji was the Prime Minister and he had asked me to suggest a suitable transport model for Arunachal Pradesh. My team had visited Arunachal Pradesh and we recommended a multimodal transport system. That was adopted partly, not fully. If that had been adopted, China would not have dared establish 500 villages in the vicinity of that. So the domestic supply chains have to be strengthened and better organized. India is lagging in uniform interpretation of GST sections. So the procedures and the GST Council must focus on that. Those interpretation of GST sections and the interpretations thereof have to be clarified. India's huge market base of its own does not require the market outside at all. So if the sanctions are there, because of the war you cannot take, immaterial. Your territorial domain is much larger than most of the countries in the world. So that can help you. And not only territory, I'm talking about both the population and territory combined. Then second thing is we have to simplify the law for setting up and carrying on business in India. There is some step forward, but then it's not enough. As a matter of fact, like in Canada, if you want to set up a business, it's just 10 minutes job. You don't have to go anywhere, you can do it. And the more the number of international names in India for manufacturing products services, the more the opposition in overseas national plans to impose sanctions. And there will be demand for to reduce the harshness of sanctions. So get those people to come and manufacture in your country. As a matter of fact, that investment should not be in money. Let's say, okay, we collaborate, period. So we get the name. And once we get the name, they don't want the name to be solid. Now we have closed GST circle for 80% of the goods in India. That is ridiculous. How can 80% of the goods in India not be covered by GST? So what is required is you must bring in stamp duty. Power and oil and gas sectors into GST sector and close the GST loop. So if you bring the stamp duty section, the power sector, the oil and gas sector into GST circle, this loop of 80% of the business being out GST. People are criticizing GST, but it's a great achievement of the present government, and it needs to be enhanced by enhancing it. So close the loop, make it absolutely universal. And what will happen? This will be very beneficial to the Indian businesses because their cost will drop with the indirect tax not being the cost. So Indian consumer will also gain ultimately because he'll be aware how much GST he has to pay. Then, unfortunately, India has talked about its agrarian economy, but it hasn't really bothered, especially after the revolution, the Green Revolution. What we have got to see is we have to look to the agrarian sector. It is still stuck in that time wrap of 1940s to 1960s. So we have got to bring it up to date. And the three farm laws which have been shelved with the government, the people were not educated properly. They were the excellent way for modernization. Then this sector, which is so human dependent, has to pick up and do things clearly and differently. And this requires a cooperation between the states and the center. And the biggest problem that we are afraid of sanction is our susceptibility, our weakness, and the dependence on oil and gas imports and the prices and the sources of their availability. These imports are killer burden on the balance of payment. So if you can garner wind, solar, hydro, today we are in the solar energy number one in the world. We should be number one in the wind, hydro, geothermal energy we are not using at all. And India has such an immense reserve of geothermal energy that if we use it properly, we can supply the energy to the industry, to the domestic customer, to everybody free of cost. We have the competence. So what we need to do is to bring the tax and the incentive provisions properly Private vehicles must be disincentivized and the public transport should be encouraged. Don't bother about the cars, bother about the buses, easy buses. Public sector undertaking must emphasize that the mass transport is much more important. During the pandemic, offices have been organizing employees pick up by large transport vehicles. So why not encourage it? Then another thing is that focus on infrastructure creation, roads, bridges, metros, railway, waterways, ports. This will result not only in connectivity but will generate employment and create a long-term asset for the public use. And let the government not do it. Let it adopt the boot principle, build, own, operate, transfer. Build, own, operate. Indian government and the Indian people have to understand the harsh fact that the business will drive growth and economic prosperity. Businesses and businessmen are not to be looked down on. Let the governments focus on three things: health, education, and social benefits, accompanied by the financial inclusions. So build up your financial institutions. They are absolutely in a horrible shape. Build on much more and give the business to grow and expand. The national focus has to shift from size of economy and focus on the gross national contentment. Don't care about your economy is how many US trillion dollars. That's immaterial. You say $5 trillion, but how much is the national contentment? If the nation is simmering with discontent, what difference does it make? We are 10 million trillion economy or 20 trillion economy. If the 80% of the masses are just looking to the heaven for support and not to themselves. So from the turmoil that is envisaged and will occur, India will emerge much stronger and more independent in its internal and external affairs if you go along these lines. So these options have to be exercised and exercised sensibly with a real interest in mind. And that's the way you can really, really gain, if not only a foothold, but preeminence in the country, in the world, in the globe.